Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Although this is a session specifically organized for the region of Europe, I know we have many people from other regions in the world attending as well, and we are very happy that you're here. Welcome to the Regional Science-Based Targets Exchange webinar, specifically focusing on the chemicals sector. We have some great speakers for you today, and lots of opportunity for Q&A. I'll quickly run through the speakers we have for you today before we'll kick off with their presentations, and I'll also be providing you with some housekeeping comments. The speakers you'll be seeing in the session today, who will start with their presentations shortly. First of all, we have Diana Farmer, Action Manager, Corporate Engagement at CDP on behalf of the Science-Based Targets Institute. And then we have two practitioners from the field, your colleagues from other chemicals companies in Europe. And we have Dr. Robert Bouwman, Senior Manager Sustainability at Wacker Chemie AG, and Dr. Lucas J. Jonkind, Program Manager, Carbon Footprint at AkzoNobel. Before we get started with their presentations, a few small housekeeping comments. Please feel free to use the chat box for comments and for sharing resources if you feel the need, the urge to, and please use the Q&A feature to ask questions to the speakers. If applicable, indicate to whom your question is directed, if it is to a specific speaker or to all three of our speakers today. And also, please note, we have the option to ask questions anonymously, if that is an option you would like to use. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Diana Farmer, Action Manager, Corporate Engagement at CDP, with us today on behalf also of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. The floor is yours, Diana.
Thanks so much, Marco. Thank you for the invitation and everyone here for joining today. I'm not going to reintroduce myself because we know we have very limited time each, so we can go ahead to the next slide, and I'll just quickly introduce the SBTI just to remind everyone kind of why we were founded. So the SBTI was founded on a very simple idea, and that was that business climate targets should be based on science. We do have a few very clear and specific societal goals, like warming or like limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement. And the idea is, of course, that companies really should be reducing emissions by an amount that's consistent with these overall societal goals. So with that idea, the SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative, was brought into being in 2014 by those partners that are listed here: CDP, UN Global Compact, WRI, and WWF. And in under a decade, it has become the vanguard of climate mitigation for non-state actors. So today, really being one of the most common ways for the private sector to show alignment with the goals of the Paris Agreement. I am a part of CDP. I'm partly dedicated to this SBTI, as all of these partners are still kind of running this organization today as it stands. But really excited that, we've seen rapid adoption, especially in the last year and a half, with over 3,800 companies committing to setting science-based targets and more than 1,800 having validated targets. And then we're so close to that 1,400 companies that are leading the way with net zero commitments. We can go to the next slide. I wanted to also quickly summarize the two overall target setting approaches. This is really important before I quickly talk about the chemicals project. But the SBTI has set these two target setting approaches that it allows. On the left, we see the absolute reduction or absolute contraction method. Through that route, the SBTI is asking all companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the same linear annual absolute reduction rate. It's a mouthful, but basically saying we're expecting around 4.2% annual reductions on an absolute basis from all companies. That's the rate that the IPCC has asked the global economy to reduce by. So for near-term targets, that's over 5 to 10 years, aligned with that 4.2% annual reduction. We don't actually expect annual progress, but we can talk about that later. And we all know we do need kind of immediate and steep reductions, but that's just the general pathway. And then on the right, we have the sector-based approach. So that's based on sector-specific pathways that are developed by the International Energy Agency. And those pathways actually take into consideration both historical developments within a sector, future projections for demand, and technological potential and innovation potential basically in that sector. So the result of that is usually a physical intensity target that all companies within a sector should converge on, typically by 2050, but there are some exceptions to that. The power sector is expected to decarbonize much earlier than most, so by 2040. And historically, there hasn't been a sector-based approach for chemicals companies. And that's what the current project underway is really looking to develop. So it also says here, as you know, that it's developed for homogeneous sectors, typically because we want it to be converging on one physical indicator. The chemical sector is so diverse. There's a lot of different products, so it's impossible to choose one physical indicator that everyone should converge upon. And I'll talk more about kind of what that's going to look like instead, but just want to acknowledge that the chemical sector is not homogeneous by any means. I encourage you to read more about these target setting approaches on the SBTI's website if you want to learn more and if they apply to different parts of your business. And I think we can just go to the next slide actually at this point. So what are the goals of this ongoing chemicals project? First of all, like I said, SDA pathway really generally reserved for homogeneous sectors. And the chemical sector is definitely not that. So through this project, the SBTI intends to develop specific pathways for the largest chemicals product categories. And because the sector is so diverse, the beginning of the project, what's really underway right now is just trying to disaggregate the sector in a meaningful way, including disaggregating the overall carbon budget for the chemical sector as a whole into the various product categories and trying to understand the potential for each of those products to decarbonize. The SBTI, along with the support of an expert advisory group, which is always convened for these projects, is reviewing the budget from 2020 to 2050 on these various chemicals, reviewing scenarios, and starting to determine what budget we're working with in order to allocate it to various products. It kicked off in July this year, and by next spring, the intention is to have an initial report and public consultation on the scope 1, 2, and 3 deliverables for the project. So that milestone interim report, expected hopefully in May or June of 2023, will evaluate and expand on what's underway here, what the subsector decarbonization scenarios look like, what the intensity pathways for about 4 to 7 of the largest products or product groups looks like. So that's ammonia, ethylene, propylene, and others, and 1 or more residual physical intensity pathways for other chemicals products kind of in a whole bucket that aren't in these largest product groups. And really importantly, the interim report will also baseline scope 3 accounting practices. I know there are some questions already about this, but the intention is to assess and map the existing resources on scope 3 emissions accounting and expand on those best practices for chemicals companies with a focus on scope 3 categories 1, 10, 11, and 12. And of particular focus is the end-of-life accounting. So the chemical sector is obviously uniquely positioned to increase the share of recycled materials. And so it's critical in order to include that in science-based target setting, to apply consistent boundary and accounting approaches to that. So by the end of 2023, hoping to have comprehensive sector-wide guidance on setting science-based targets for you all and complementary target setting tool. We can go ahead and just move to the next slide before I stop. I just want to say that while this project is underway, it's not an excuse for inaction. A lot of companies are taking action today, including some that we have with us. So companies can use the absolute contraction approach already. So just flagging that you can join your peers. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was very, at the same time, very informative and short. So it's incredible. Also very good to see all these names of companies that are already taking action from the chemical sector. Please, if you have questions for Diana, of course, feel free to use the Q&A feature. And in the meantime, let's give our undivided attention to Dr. Lucas Jonkin from AkzoNobel, who will share a bit about their experiences.
Yes, so I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Lucas Jonkins and I work for AkzoNobel, a company that deals in the paints and coatings industry. So we are a company, and we're the first company in the paints and coatings business actually to commit to an SBTI target. And if you read on the SBTI website, our reduction target in scope 1 and 2 for greenhouse gas emissions are 42% by 2030 from a 2020 base year. And we also committed to a scope 3 reduction of also 42% by 2030 from a 2020 base year. Well, you might ask yourself, why do you commit to 42% reduction? How does that come about? Well, actually, we had an internal target already to reduce our full value chain carbon emissions by 50% with a base year of 2018. So to keep that clear, basically, and transform that into the target as set by SBTI, which only allows for the basically setting a target over the last reported full year. We chose to go for the 42% target, which, by the way, is in line with the 1.5 degree campaign. So that is a great place to be, I think, as a member of the paints and coatings industry, and therefore the chemical industry. So we report on the categories that are set by the GHG and by SBTI. So categories 1, 10, 11, and 12. But also what we included in our assessment and our calculations is the impact that solvents or VOCs have on carbon footprint. We know that that is quite a unique sector or a unique factor for the paints and coatings industry, but we chose to include it because we do realize that the impact is non-insignificant. So definitely something to include. Yeah, and the reason why Akzo actually chose to commit to SBTI is very, very simple and very clear. We want to be a leader in our industry in terms of sustainability, and we feel that with an SBTI target, we are really setting a target that is understandable for everyone, that is moving in the right direction, so towards that max 1.5 degrees global warming by the end of the century. And it gives also a signal to the partners in our value chain that we are committed to reducing our carbon footprint. If you move on to the next slide, then I have some information on our company in general. So AkzoNobel is a global paints and coatings company. We are a Dutch multinational, so we're headquartered actually in Amsterdam, and our history goes back over 200 years. Last year we had close to 10 billion in revenue. We have 32,000 employers. And I added a fun fact here, that is that our carbon footprint split, if you look at how that is, how that comes about, we have in our scope 1 and 2, so our own operations is only 2% of our total carbon footprint. And our scope 3 split between upstream and downstream is actually 98% of our carbon footprint. So that means that we've set a target to reduce 98% of our carbon footprint by 50%, without those carbon footprint figures actually being generated at our own facilities. So we think this is definitely a problem. The carbon footprint emissions within the chemical sector is definitely a problem we need to solve together by collaborating within the value chain. So it's important to note that we have set ambitious targets, and we hope to inspire you to do the same, basically. And that is it from my side, Marco. So back to you.
Thank you so much for some very, very short and important insights into the reality of AkzoNobel when it comes to science-based targets. And making sure we have more than enough time for Q&A, I would like to go straight forward to Dr. Robert Bouwman from Wacker Chemie and with his presentation. In the meantime, if you have questions for any of the speakers, feel free, of course, to already use the Q&A feature to get them on our list. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Dr. Bouwman.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share our experiences and knowledge about decarbonization and GHG target setting with colleagues from other companies. Please click on the first part. Yeah, maybe you can fill this slide already. So for an introduction to Wacker, I don't want to bore you with company figures such as the 6.2 billion sales in the last year, or the number of worldwide production sites, or even the number of Wacker employees. But I want to introduce Wacker, showing you where you meet Wacker and where you get in touch with Wacker products every day. So the Wacker 4 business divisions, silicones, polymers, biosolutions, and polysilicon, provides you with intermediate products for several parts, several branches of the industry. So for example, cosmetics and healthcare, automotive, construction industry, pharma, food, and finally also photovoltaics and semiconductors industry. You can go to the next slide, please. So to produce this variety of different products, we currently emit greenhouse gases of about 3.5 megatons of CO2 in scope 1 and 2. Please click on the first part, and about 7 megatons in scope 3. But we have targets at the roadmaps in place to reduce these emissions until 2030 and to reach net zero until 2045. So related to our 1.5 degrees SBTi target, we will reduce our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 1/2, and the scope 3 upstream emissions by 1/4 of the emissions based on the year 2020. And as I said, by 2045, we intend to reach net zero then. So this was a very, very brief introduction to Wacker, and now feel free to ask your questions, and I will be happy if I'm able to share my experience with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baumann, for that short introduction. That was perfect, and leaves us with plenty of time for Q&A. Yes, I would like to ask the other speakers to join Dr. Baumann and myself in gallery mode, so all the attendees can also see you. And I would like to get started with, first of all, the pre-submitted questions that some of you asked in the run-up to this session, for which we thank you, of course. So let's dive straight into those. After that, we will, of course, continue with the questions that have been asked already, a few in the Q&A feature. So diving straight into some technicalities, perhaps. We've received multiple questions actually on how can we better or more detailed calculate our scope 3 downstream emissions, and then especially scope 3.10 on the processing of sold products, scope 3.11, the use of sold products, and 3.12, the end-of-life treatment of sold products. Dr. Baumann, maybe I can start with you to ask to give some information, some tips and tricks perhaps on how to deal with these.
Yes, well, I can try to say a few words or sentences to this question. As I said, we have a very big, broad variety of different products. We have several thousands of different products and even more different applications for our products. So these categories, especially 10 and 11, is pretty difficult to handle in order to get the whole greenhouse gas inventory for target setting. So our approach is first to have a look at the direct emissions that are caused by our products during further processing or during their usage. And also according to the greenhouse gas standard protocol and to the WBSCD recommendation, we saw that we do not have any, for example, not any fuels, or do not have any refrigerants, or do not have any fertilizers that cause direct CO2 emissions on their usage or on their further processing. And that was the reason why we decided not to calculate the indirect emissions that are caused by the further processing or further usage of our products. Concerning category 12, we have a look at the products we deliver to the different countries. We have the look at the carbon content of our different, let's say, product groups. And then we had a look at the different ways of waste disposal in the different regions, and then calculate how much of our products or how much of the carbon content of our products is disposed in the different way in the different regions. And from that approach, we calculate then the CO2 emissions coming from the carbon content of our products in the different regions.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Just to make sure that we cover the question completely and get every bit of knowledge from our esteemed panel. Diana, would you have anything to add to this question?
I would just say, and I'd be interested to hear if Lucas has anything else to say about this, but I think Scope 3 is quite challenging for almost every sector we speak to, especially those that have a huge Scope 3 where it's over 90% of your footprint for the most part. And we get a lot of questions around the quality of that information, of that data. The challenge here is that it's quite a cyclical relationship. We really need to start, it's a chicken and the egg question. We need to start looking for the data in order to improve it. So the SBTI encourages companies to start even with imperfect data for their target setting. We're not expecting, a perfect Scope 3 inventory. So I think estimates, assumptions, and just being clear about how you're making those assumptions is really important to us, but just acknowledging that we know that there's a lot of improvements that will be made over time.
Very, very good. And Lucas, I will also ask you if you have any addition, and at the same time already ask you the next question to make sure that we keep on track to answer all of the questions. So please reflect on this one, and also after that, the question on how do you address with your board and executives the reality that so many of the solutions to decarbonize and sequestration have yet to be fully developed, demonstrated, or commercialized. So feel free to reflect on the first question and go straight to the second one.
Yeah, sure. And I think they actually perfectly line up also with what Diana was saying. So definitely in your Scope 3 downstream, not everything is based on actual precise data or granular data that we have of all of our customers. That is impossible. Not all of our customers are actually recording the data on how much energy they, for example, use when they are applying a coating. However, that does not mean we cannot start off with what we know about our products. And on the one hand, you can say our customers use our products, so they are doing something with it. We don't know what's happening, but the truth is we know our products, right? So that means that we also know what our customers are approximately doing. And that is already a perfect basis to start setting targets on, I think. And in that way, relating also to the question, maybe I can go into Scope 10, 11, and 12. We mostly follow the GHG protocol that is also in the SBTI basically document on how to fill in your targets. But definitely important there is engage with your customers. If you want precise data, tell them that you want to reduce your carbon footprint. Ask them if they want to reduce their carbon footprint and figure out how you can do that together. Because for a lot of customers, reducing your carbon footprint, their carbon footprint is something you can influence, especially in the paints and coatings business as well. And that gives them savings, for example, on gas use, on electricity use as well. Going to how to set targets, how to convince people to set targets without actually knowing which solutions will be the leading solutions in the future. This is also a case of just starting, right? So to a lot of our business, the carbon emission and people catching up with how we can solve it, but also what the actual problem is, can be a huge risk to our business in a way that we may not be able to do business in the future if we're not sustainable. Rather than waiting for the perfect solution to be invented, we started off with setting a signal and saying to our partners in the supply chain, we want to change. And that is definitely something that is recognized and is now being communicated broadly within also the top management of our company.
Thank you. And Robert, if I might ask, how is that for you at your company? How do you address these questions that you maybe, or these explanations that you have to provide to your board and executives?
Well, yes. Let's say we as Wacker, also the board, decides to reduce our CO2 emissions or to reduce greenhouse gas emissions until 2030, and then get to net zero 2045. So this decision comes from the board. And now we have to look, where are the main emissions come from? Yeah, at Wacker, the main Scope 1 and 2 emissions comes from our power plants and the purchased power. And so we can have a look at them. So what do we have to do to reduce, for example, steam from fossil fuels, or how can we reduce these Scope 2 emissions by purchase of renewable energies, for example? So I think most of the technologies that we need for reducing Scope 1 and 2 emissions are already available. So this is not the problem. The problem, or the question is, do we want to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? And then have a look, what are the main sources? And then use the available technologies.
Yeah. Okay, that actually relates also to the next question, which Diana, hopefully you can reflect on both, which is specifically asking how to get the commitment for these large investments. So on the one hand, indeed, how to explain that some options are still being developed or being commercialized, and related to that, specifically on the financing part of those current solutions or future solutions.
Sure, I do agree. I think on the last question, that it's always a question of risk and opportunity. I think Lucas spoke really well to the risk, but the opportunity is really innovation. I mean, so many companies that have set targets tell us that it has been a huge catalyst for innovation in the company. And it's really, I think, a question of how are you planning to remain competitive in the future? Would you rather be developing the solution or adopt them once they're ready and developed by your competitors who started this work much earlier? I think it's really, there's a lot about the business case that we could talk about, but I think it's quite always about risk and opportunity. As for the funding, I think that kind of follows the innovations, right? So I think at some point you're going to land on something that might already meet all of your internal requirements for investment, but maybe it's also a conversation to have with your executive teams or a CFO about what that hurdle rate is, what expected rate of return. Do you need to extend your payback period internally? Do you use a internal price on carbon and drive all of that into an investment, into R&D, basically, if you're having other teams pay for the carbon that is going into their products that might be more carbon intensive. So that's just a few tools, but I think also our practitioners here might be able to speak to those that they might have used.
Exactly. I would love to hear, Robert, how you've convinced your CFO to invest largely into this ambition.
Yeah, well, the investments on decarbonization, or better to say defossilization, are always investments in the future. So it's difficult to define a return of invest for such investments. But on the other hand, stakeholders like investors, like customers, or even the legal authorities request and will request more and more intensively for product carbon footprints, for defossilization reduction targets, and also for roadmaps. So as Diana said, if companies not playing along here, they are going to lose customers, investors, business, and finally profit. So we are investing in our future. And if we want to stay competitive with other companies, we have to invest, even if a return of invest is pretty low.
Yeah. And how is that for AkzoNobel? Look, I think you become better friends with the finance department now that you've set these ambitions, or less friendly.
No, most definitely we've become better friends. Everybody knows that ESG reporting is becoming a large part of the playing field within sustainability. But definitely also our senior managers are online with the idea of opportunity, right? We wouldn't have set an SBTi target if we didn't think that would bring commercial opportunity to our business as well. It's not all about managing risks. It's also about taking that step forward and being sustainable, and then hopefully benefiting by being recognized and rewarded as setting sustainable benchmarks basically in the industry. So yeah, definitely good to approach it from a positive side as well.
Yeah. Perfect, definitely. Thank you so much. Let's go to the next question, because I do want to try and cover all of them. This question seems to be a yes/no question, but let's see how it goes. For Diana, the question here: does the SDA for chemical sector is also suitable for bioplastics and bio-based chemical intermediates?
I'm afraid this is a question that is under discussion, so it's not something we have an answer to immediately. I will, maybe Marco, I can ask for the latest, just in what's developed in the last like 6 months within the project, but we don't really have an answer because they're still defining the boundaries of this work and how the sector will be disaggregated, as I mentioned. So Marco, I can follow up with kind of the latest via email if you want to get back to everybody.
Yes, very, very good. That would be great. Francesco, I hope that's also acceptable to you. You asked the question. We will get back to you with more information on this. Very good question. Thank you. Going then to the next question, I think, Diana, which might also be under discussion, but let's give it a try anyways. And I'm also curious to the views of the practitioners actually on this question. How will compensation activities be considered in the standard? Will it be possible to relate targets and compensation activities?
Yeah, I think I would need to know actually also how that compensation is being defined by the person asking the question, but I'm assuming that you mean there's neutralization and then there's compensation, which is what we used to call beyond value chain mitigation, essentially. So compensation we've always referred to as outside of your value chain. If that's how you're meaning the question, that will remain outside of the value chain and thus not really contribute to an emission reduction. So it's something that we encourage because we do need more than just to all reduce our emissions in order to make it to net zero and achieve this goal. But the SBTi is only really talking about emission reduction within your direct value chain. So any kind of offsetting or anything outside of that remains outside of it. And I think there are best practices underway, but the SBTi is just kind of, we're still figuring out how exactly to encourage that and what role we'll play. Maybe I'll stop there. Sorry, there's a lot more to talk about with bio-based removals and a lot of stuff, but I'll stop.
That's very clear, and I think this is true not just with regards to the chemical sector, but just the overall SBTi approach is of course that offsetting within your own value chain is not an acceptable approach to actually be validated. And there are some very small minor exceptions, I believe, but that is not very, very material. Even though it might still be interesting to hear the opinions of our practitioners on the practice of compensation and or offsetting related to their climate plans. Let's see, Lucas, shall we start with you?
Yeah, sure. No, I want to make it absolutely clear that reduction is first and foremost. So we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint by 50%. We're not trying to buy certificates to offset our carbon footprint by 50%. So that is definitely our target. And we're approached daily by companies that want to sell us carbon certificates and make sure that we can handle it that way. But we're confident that we can actually make a huge reduction in our value chain happen through this SBTI target and the plans that are related to that.
We're happy to hear that. How is that for you, Robert?
Yes, and at the Wacker reduction plan for greenhouse gas emissions, there's no compensation part. So when we talk about defossilization or reduction of greenhouse gases, we talk about mitigation and real reduction on our processes and on purchased energy and so on. But I want to add one thing concerning scope 3 emissions, because at scope 3 emissions, for example, from raws or from transportation and so on, you often hear from suppliers that they provide green energy or green raws and so on and so on. And you have to be very, very careful that these green energy is not green washed, so that there are no compensations along with that green name of the raws.
That's actually a very, very good point. And I think it relates to our next question, which is what are the greatest challenges in the engagement target with external partners? Would you like to continue on that, Robert, and expand a bit more?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I said is one of the challenges to really decide what kind of raw material or what kind of energy is really with a low carbon footprint and not compensated. I think the other thing is the availability. Currently, the availability of raws with a low carbon footprint as well as energy with a low carbon footprint. It's getting better in Europe, and it's getting better on some other countries, but it's still difficult in some countries where we have production sites to get renewable energy, for example. Yeah, these are the challenges concerning scope 3 emissions and also reducing scope 2 emissions.
Thank you. Diana, would you like to add to that relating to the question on what are the greatest challenges when it comes to the engagement target with external partners, specifically in of course, the chemical sector?
Oh gosh, well, I think for the most part, it's with the engagement target, if that's what we're actually talking about, it's typically just trying to get your suppliers or your customers to set their own science-based targets. I see this more with suppliers. I think it might be more relevant in the chemicals sector to talk about downstream, and that's actually just not something we see as often in other sectors. Most sectors have their highest scope 3 as purchased goods and services and capital goods. But I think we're all walking this fine line of saying it's required, but it's not really required yet. So we're all kind of like, we really want to put the pressure on, but no one's really willing to say, if you don't do this, we're not selling to you anymore. We're not buying from you anymore. I think we've seen Microsoft is actually the first one to require it actually as part of their contracts with suppliers. So I think you're going to start to see more and more of that, but I think it's more of like figuring out the enforcement mechanism if it's not just your relationship that's going to drive that, and then resourcing if any of your partners are just not as big as you. It's right. Always a challenge.
Okay, well, and then I'm very curious, Lucas, are there any plans at AkzoNobel to follow the example of Microsoft in that instance? Or is that still?
I'm sorry, maybe... Lucas. I didn't mean to.
No worries.
Go ahead.
No, it's always good to see how other companies approach things. So we don't have to be absolute first to say, hey, guys, we cannot do business with you if you don't have targets. And I must be clear, we don't have those kind of plans right now. But I mean, 50% reduction in our value chain means 50% reduction in our value chain, which means that if 98% of our carbon footprint is not in our own processes, we do need to reduce. So we are going to get more, how do you say this, picky about who we deal with. And if they cannot commit to reducing carbon footprint, yeah, then it's up to the commercial teams, and I'm not part of a commercial team, to decide on how to move forward with that, how to balance our carbon footprint reductions versus commercial interests.
Okay, well, then I think it's only fair, because this was a tough question, I guess, to ask that one to Robert as well, relating to those, you know, are we going to put it in our contracts that you know, your customers in this case have to also join the SBTI?
Well, no, we do not have such plans currently. So as I said, it's difficult to to have the availability of, for example, of raws that have a low carbon footprint, and it's on the other side also difficult to separate customers if they have a science-based target or not. So yeah, of course, we want to earn money in future, and on the other hand, we want to reduce our carbon footprint. But let's say we are in a better situation than AkzoNobel. 1/3 of our emissions are Scope 1 and Scope 2. So we first can focus on that and focus on our own business, and then on the other side, on the other hand, we can look into our suppliers and customers then.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question was already asked, was already answered. That was the question: does reduction really mean reduction and not just offsetting? Well, I think the whole panel here just very explicitly stated that yes, reduction actually means reduction, and not offsetting. Although it might be difficult to assess in your Scope 3 if others are also approaching the topic in that way. But that question was answered. Let's see. I think this one might be for you, Diana. As an industrial startup, so we're talking about a smaller company here, probably. How should we set our science-based targets during the establishing phase, so that we are not in a situation where we need to start reducing immediately, but we would be proactive in that sense? This is the first time I've seen this kind of question. Very interesting. I'm not sure if you have an answer for that one, Diana.
Well, I think I have actually been asked this before. I've talked to some startups that, you know, they're about to grow rapidly. I've talked to mining companies that haven't started operations yet. They're still in the environmental permitting stages, and they can't set a science-based target because they don't have a representative greenhouse gas inventory to set a target on. So I think that's essentially the answer. I mean, you can't set a target if you don't know what your greenhouse gas inventory will be. But I think what's really critical, and, you know, even Larry Fink from BlackRock has said, you know, the next 100 most successful companies are going to be really the innovative ones that are building this in from the beginning, that are thinking about their inventories, their greenhouse gas emissions, the same way they're thinking about their revenue and their costs. So I think it's something where you both have a great opportunity to really embed this from the beginning, and to build it into the company and how it operates. Whereas maybe our colleagues here, Robert and Lucas, have had to really make the case to start integrating it. But you also can't really set a target if you're about to start growing your business that's just starting up over the next 3 years. So I don't want to say that science-based targets isn't for everyone, but I think it's really for established companies that need to alter their business models and want to do so in line with science and something that's grounded in science versus, you know, a startup. I don't know if Robert or Lucas have any opinions on this, or if that's kind of upsetting for them to hear that startups are off the hook, but it's really challenging, I think, unless you have something that's a representative footprint to set a target. You could certainly project what that will be and understand, from there, how will you start reducing, but maybe don't get to the peak in the first place. I don't know.
Exactly. And I would hope that any company starting now, indeed, that they won't result in huge spikes in emissions, of course. Let's hope so. There's more and more questions coming in. I just want to say for the audience, if we don't get to every single question, don't worry, we will follow up afterwards with you. So feel free to keep sending in questions until the very last second. Then a question that was, I think, slightly answered, but just for clarity, I will answer it again. And the question is, will there be a guide for Scope 3 calculations in the chemical sector be published? And the answer is that it is currently under development. And there's a sector-specific methodology being currently developed by the SBTI. So yes, in the future, probably 2023, that will be published. Moving on to the next question for both AkzoNobel and Wacker. Do you have a supplier engagement mechanism to monitor, manage, and reduce GHG emissions? Especially, it says here, and I guess that's true, with 98% in Scope 3 at AkzoNobel, this could be a key element to learn from. Why don't we start with you, Robert?
Okay, concerning supplier engagement, I have not so much experience on that, but I can say that Wacker is part of the Together for Sustainability organization. And so within this organization, we are in touch with our suppliers, as well as our procurement group is always in touch with suppliers and also discuss with them concerning CO2 emissions. So that's what I can say to supplier engagement.
Very well. Off to you, Lucas. And also because the next question is very much related to this, so maybe we can cover them in one go. The other question is with 98% in Scope 3 again, what were the challenges when it came to gathering the upstream data for the Scope 3 inventory, and how did you tackle them? So supplier engagement mechanism and the upstream data for the Scope 3 inventory.
Yeah, those are great and indeed related questions. So basically, our procurement department was one of the first departments we engaged when rolling out carbon footprint reduction plans, actually. So we trained them in how they can ask the right questions to our suppliers, which of course is vastly important. And there's complete buy-in from their side now on getting actual numbers from our suppliers, rather than how we did this before, gathering upstream data, which was through basically, it's all according to the guidelines, but we basically look at what kind of product categories we buy, and we match that to industry standard databases on production values in terms of carbon footprint for those types of materials. So those give you industry average data that is basically a good starting point to set your reduction targets also for Scope 3 upstream. So we are there now. AkzoNobel is also a partner of Together for Sustainability. For those of you who don't know, Together for Sustainability is an initiative from the chemical industry in which upstream, so production carbon footprint or product carbon footprint actually, will be it will be a blockchain mechanism in which every company in the value chain can add their own carbon footprint, and then the company receiving the product actually knows how much is coming before. So that is a great initiative. That is something we see as a way forward, and we encourage people to participate in this. But yeah, for now, we're still using these industry standard databases. Maybe a final thing to say on procurement, we do ask our suppliers to adhere to certain rating agencies and that kind of stuff. So we do ask that from them. That is, for now, it's a preferred. In the future, that may be a hard requirement.
Thank you so much. It's an interesting question. It's a topic that I'm personally working more on, which is the um, linking of executive pay structures and packages to ESG or SDG related topics, such as, of course, emissions reduction strategies. So the question very specifically is there a financial incentive or something similar to a successful GHG reduction for the C-level management, so for the CEO, CFOs, etc. Let's just ask our practitioners. Do you know if your C-suite is if their payment packages are connected to your emission reduction targets? And let's start with Robert. I'm sorry. Yep.
Yes, there is. Yes.
Thank
yes,
you.
their payments are connected to our targets. Yes.
All right. Well, that's clear. It is indeed a yes or no question, I guess. Lucas, how is that for you?
Yeah, so it is a yes or no question. My answer is going to be no, but no. So we say, of course, that requires some additional information. So no, as of now, that is not the case. However, we set our SBTI target, and that has been validated last year in December. And with all the planning cycles and that come afterwards, I do expect that to happen in the future.
Very good. Let's just check in with Diana if she has something to offer on this specific question.
Yeah, I wanted to say actually on the two last points. First, that CDP does have a supply chain program where a lot of companies are asking for that primary data from suppliers. So I do agree with Lucas that average emission factor is very accurate, but I think it doesn't really reflect maybe any engagement you've specifically had to lower a specific supplier's emissions. But otherwise, I think very effective way to map that. On this last point, I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but CDP has long incentivized with our scoring and asked whether companies, C-suite executives have KPIs and financial packages and rewards tied to climate goals. And I think a lot of them do, but I could get you the final percentage if you want that, Marco, to tell you globally out of all the companies reporting and how many have that. But I think it's quite common at this point.
No, it is becoming common indeed, but I do believe that's a different work stream that I'm involved in, and that there's still a lot of thought leadership to do on this topic, on how to actually do this in the right way, because there's also a few wrong ways to connect payment of executives to sustainability targets. But that's a topic for another webinar, maybe next time. For now, let's move on, because I think we have time to cover at least one more question. Let's see. This is a follow-up question. What would be the science-based level where to balance carbon footprint versus commercial viability? Because right now there are some trade-offs. Well, let's see. And also there's another question, and that's then also the final question, I think, that we can answer, but that's very quickly. Diana, could you agree sharing the link to the Microsoft purchasing policy that you mentioned, where they have like their suppliers have to be in the SBTI? If you can find it quickly, maybe put it in the chat.
I might have to follow up with that, Marco, because I'm looking through. I looked at it weeks ago now. I can't find it again, but I'll find it and send it.
Then we'll follow up with that per email. So basically the question, carbon footprint versus commercial viability in the chemical sector. Some reflections, please, Robert.
I have to say I cannot say anything to that. So sorry.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. It is a difficult question and maybe more of a philosophical question as well at this point in time. But let's try. Lucas, would you like to say something on this question?
Yeah. I'll then reflect a bit on the question. So, is there a clear cut? This is how much renewable or carbon footprint reduced products can be more in cost than traditional products? No, that is not quite clear yet, and it's not quite clear. But what I want to focus on, and this is the negative side of things. The positive side is, for example, if you can develop a product that is more carbon efficient in your downstream, for example, that is something that is an opportunity to both you and your customer. So rather than focusing on the very traditional view of I am buying a direct replacement that it has some sort of sustainability benefit and that is going to cost more, and how much more can it cost? I would say look at those opportunities, those business opportunities that occur when you go to your customer and you say you can reduce gas consumption in your coating process, in our case then, or in applying our products by 50%. Mm-hmm. That is definitely a commercially interesting proposition to them, and that is helping you both in reducing your carbon footprint. So focus on these first, I would say, and then as clarity is becoming more and more as there's more clarity on what the economical value of sustainability actually is, then
thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. Also, I just realized now that there was a clarification to this question posted in the chat. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover it. Tony, we will follow up with you after the session. I wanted to respect everyone's time. Before turning over to my colleague, who has a few more things to share on follow-up opportunities, I would like to, of course, thank our esteemed panel, Robert, Diana, Lucas. It was really great to have you here. I think we had a good conversation. We managed to cover a significant amount of questions, which was good. And we have some follow-up to do as well. All in all, a very successful Friday afternoon, I think. Again, thank you so much. Also, on behalf of Global Compact Network Netherlands and the whole UN Global Compact. And for now, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Michelle, to say a few things about what you can do with us to reduce your emissions and to let us help you.
Thank you very much, Marco, and the entire Global Compact Network Netherlands for organizing this session. And of course, a big thank you to our speakers for sharing all these interesting insights on SBTs in the chemical sector. We still have one more SBT Exchange session coming up end of the month on SBTs in the forest, land, and agriculture sector. So feel free to register for that on our platform. We also have a variety of other learning opportunities available on the UN Global Compact Academy, as you can see on the screen. We have a wide range of content from short on-demand courses such as sustainable oceans and sustainable finance, to more comprehensive learning plans on topics such as greenhouse gas accounting. There's also our Changemaker series, which are one-on-one conversations with industry leaders. There's a 6-month Climate Ambition Accelerator program and many more learning experiences. All employees of UN Global Compact business participants can access the Academy and all of our offerings for free. So definitely make sure to check that out. I believe the link has been posted in the chat. Thank you for attending today's session, and a huge thank you again to the Netherlands Local Network and our speakers. We hope to see all of you again in our last SBT Exchange session end of October. And yeah, I wish all of you a great day.